Ben, why don't you go ahead and welcome everybody?
Turn my camera back on. I just want to welcome everyone to Whistling Consulting webinar that we have today. We have Scott and we also have Phil that are going to be talking to us about roof mount attachments. And we're going to look at those, and just want to tell you guys how grateful we are that you're supporting us. And I know Scott will go a little bit into this. We want to definitely have a lot of questions. So as you have questions that come in, put those, into your mind. And then Scott, how did you want to do that? Do you want to have them ask the questions as we go along, or do you want to have them wait till the end?
Yeah, if you want to post your questions inside the chat, that would be great. And then I can try and address them while I'm giving my presentation. And I'm a little unique, if most of you know me, but I will probably call on some of you on the meeting to ask you some questions as it relates to connections and your experience with them. So, bear with me. I'm not sure I know how to do that, but I may have Ben do that or myself. I think I can just click on you and then open up your mic so that you can talk and unmute you. So we'll go from there. But
and I did want to ask Phil, are you able to share?
No, the button is not. I'm not able to press the share button.
Okay, if you're going to share your screen. Okay, I added you as a presenter yesterday, so.
Okay, well, you work with that, Ben.
I will.
And we'll get started here. Heath Harpster also works here with us, and he is not going to be on the call today. He's actually hopping on the plane to come out here, out to Utah. So Phil works with Heath, and so he's going to be my right-hand guy here if we need. But anyway, I'll give it a crack and see if I can present this without too much help. So, one of the things that we have seen over the past 6 months to a year has really been a change in the connections, right? Up until about a year ago, most everybody was utilizing typically a rafter mount connection, and nobody was really using deck mounts. And then, I think what's happened is supply chain issues or cost of the product has changed over this period of time and has made it more cost effective. And maybe I'm just speculating, but and I suspect I'll call on some of you guys to confirm what your thoughts were on that as well. And I think the advantage to using a deck mount is that you don't have to know exactly where the rafter is, so it's much easier to install. So I know installers really love using these deck mounts instead of using rafter mounts, right? And so let's start out by defining the difference between a deck mount and a rafter mount. So I have a PowerPoint here. Let me share my screen. And I have some images that we can look at to kind of, can everybody see my screen?
No.
Okay, let's try again.
Yeah, not yet, Scott.
Phil's good to go now too. Oh, there we go.
Okay, able to see now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So deck mounts versus rafter mounts. So a rafter mount is when you installing your solar panels on the roof and you're putting your connectors in, that's usually the first thing that you do, right? As you're mounting your rails to the connectors, and the connectors get screwed in to the deck, through the deck and into the rafter. So this is a cross section of really what a rafter mount would look like, right? And so it's a lag bolt, usually 5/16, a stainless steel lag bolt. It could be 4 to 5 inches, and 4.5, I think, typically is what we use. And it goes into the rafter, and we do a design based on this being 2.5 inches in that rafter. So the threads of the lag bolt are in the rafter, and it supports it from being lifted off the roof under a wind load, right? So that's a deck mount. And that's a rafter mount. And then the deck mount is typically something that has several screws, but it doesn't attach into the rafter. It just goes through the decking. And so you really only get the penetration into your sheathing, which is typically could be 7/16 OSB board, or it could be plywood, and it could be 3/4 inch plywood. But typically, we're conservative, and we assume it's like 7/16 and OSB board, which is probably the most conservative way of looking at it, right? So that's the difference between a rafter mount and a deck mount, right? That's the two, right? And these are the pros and cons to rafter mounts versus deck mounts. So a rafter mount has superior strength or pull-out value, right? So when we look at our calculations from an engineering standpoint, we need to meet certain pull-out values based on wind speeds, right? So if you're in a jurisdiction like, let's say, Miami-Dade, right, county down in Florida, I think everybody probably loves to work in Miami-Dade. The wind speeds down there between 150 and 165, right? And the pull-out values are pretty significant, right? So sometimes you, even with a rafter mount, you have to modify your spacing in order to keep it from lifting off of the roof deck itself, right? So Phil, were you able to get your screen to share, or were you able to get
Yeah,
screen sharing
I
turned
should
on?
be able to
Okay.
share. Yeah.
So why don't you pull up our calculations, and we can go through something like a Miami-Dade at, say, 150 mile per hour wind speed, and we can show kind of what that looks like. So these are our calculations. And if you look on, Phil, if you want to just walk us through which one
Yeah.
is which.
Okay. So the one on the left, both of these have the same parameters in input. I have 150 mile an hour wind, exposure C, 20-degree slope, same size panels, and same spacing on the mounts. So the demand is going to be the same for both of them. What's different is this one on the left is our deck mount calc. So basically, it's 4/4 inch screws into half-inch material, whether that be plywood or OSB. So when you look at the capacities, these are only good for 220 pounds. So you could see, like, in zone one, which is the zone that has the least amount of wind pressure, the mounts would have to be spaced at 16 inches on center. But whereas if you go over here to the right, this is our rafter calculation sheet. So basically everything's the same, except for we're checking a 5/16 diameter lag screw with a 2.5 inch embedment into the structural member in the roof, whether that be a rafter or a truss top cord. And when you look at the demand versus capacity here, you could see that the capacity is 573 pounds versus 220. So you have a lot more leniency on spacing here. Like, you're good at 48 inches on center on these two first zones. After that, when you get into some of the higher wind zones, you'd have to maybe do a little bit tighter spacing. But overall, the rafter mount's going to give you a lot better values than the deck mount.
Yeah, well, great. So this really spells it out. And engineers are great at looking at calculations and wanting to hang our hat on calculations. So I can really hang my hat on these calculations, right? So what does this tell you, right? So if you were to do the same install with a deck mount connection, you would need to be at 16 inches on center with the connections, as opposed to 48-inch on center if you're connecting into the rafter, right? That's really huge, from the amount of the quantity of connections that you need and you have to purchase. So they may be cheaper, right? If you're purchasing these deck mounts, maybe easier to install, but you're going to need more. So there's going to be more labor and there's going to be more cost to install it, right? And then now, so here's the big question, right? Is it appropriate to substitute out in the field? Like, let's say you have a design and we do a letter for you at Whistling Consulting, and we identify a 5/16 lag bolt being connected into a rafter with a 2.5 inch penetration. We go through these calculations to verify that it works, and you have it at, let's say it's not 150, it's 72-inch on center, right? Maybe you're in California, the wind speeds there is typically 115 miles per hour. So let's say you're in California, 115 miles per hour, maybe even less, and it works. And Heath, Phil, if you could just change that to 115. and do it for both the rafter and a deck mount. And we look at the spacing. You could be up to probably 72 inches, right?
Yeah, 72.
Yeah, so you could be up to 72 inches with a lag bolt going into the rafter. So let's say now your crew goes out and they don't have lag bolts. They have the 1/4 inch lag bolts. They don't have 5/16 lag bolts. And they just figure I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get it installed. They get up on the roof and I'm like, okay, I don't need to worry about it. I'm just going to put these deck mounts in. So they put the deck mounts in at 72-inch on center because that's what we said in the letter would be okay. And that's what the CAD indicates. And then lo and behold, you look on the left where we have the same calculations in California at 115-mile-an-hour wind that shows you need to be at 36 inches on center instead of 72-inch on center. So now you're in a situation where potentially if you hit this wind speed, the design wind speed, you potentially could have a problem with the panels getting pulled off of the roof and the screws failing on the decking material. And that's kind of a big deal, right? A lot of people don't necessarily realize that, but this is potentially what could happen. And then you wind up having panels falling off roofs and damaging cars or hitting other structures or even, God forbid, hitting somebody like a person. Then you have a lot more issues to worry about than having to spend a little bit more money on connecting things into rafters and then the little bit of extra labor and time it takes to install it, right? So very important to think about those, right? Now, can we install with deck mounts? Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason why we can't use deck mounts, but what's super important is that we know that at the time you do the design, right? Because then you're not in a situation where you're putting, deck mounts where we called out rafter mounts and you got to worry about the spacing being incorrect, right? So super important that we know up front from a design perspective what things you can and can't do, and so that you're addressing these concerns related to the spacing. Um, and that's, really that's the main crutch of the difference between rafter mounts and deck mounts. And I think it's important that everybody in the industry knows this, but I don't think the sales reps who are selling you deck mounts are going to tell you this, right? And they might give you some background data or some testing values that are buried in a spec sheet or buried in an installation manual that aren't they're not going to focus on that because they know that that's kind of not what you want to hear. They want to sell you the product. So anyway, I'd like to open up for some questions here and maybe ask some questions of those. Some of you I recognize on this call, some of you I don't. Um, but I know Dan, you've been working with us for a while, so I'm going to turn your mic on. And what's your experience with deck mounts versus rafter mounts? Are you there, Dan?
Oh, I had to click the unmute on my side too. Yes, so we typically do mostly new construction when it comes to residential projects, but when it comes with ones to where we have an interesting roof framing, mostly like like a red H joist or an I joist, you can't put a fastener in there, then a deck mount through the OSB or whatever the roof has is just it's a godsend, since that way we don't have to worry about trying to be perfect on there. And then of
Yeah.
course we just load it up maximum for the screws, because a few more screws is better than having the panel fly off.
That's a good point. And you do have these deck mounts that you can install with 2 screws or 5 screws or even 8 screws, right? Certain deck mounts you can put even more screws in. So it sounds like you're using the maximum amount of screws you're able to use with these connections. And do your crews, are they ever instructed? And I mean, I'm putting you on the spot. Are they ever instructed to just go ahead, you can use whichever one you want? Or do they know that, hey, this has to be deck mount or this has to be rafter mount, right?
So If we have specific roofs, we just go with one attachment or the other. We try streamlining it. And then on some projects where we have two different types of roofs, we do specifically identify what roof gets what attachment and the spacing on how that goes. And then obviously the important part too is identifying the fasteners for that and the withdraw values, because can't use what do we call it? You can't use like decking screws that aren't rated, so to say. So
Right.
it yeah, it just changes.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're working this into your designs up front.
Correct. Yeah, we try
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
everything as streamlined as possible, and especially like if we have like 100+ lot projects, we want it to where it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. No, that's great. Okay, so Phil, if you wouldn't mind, can you change the number of screws on your deck mount calculations? Instead of putting 4 in there, put 2, and let's see what that value is now. So the value goes down to 110, almost half of where it was, which makes sense. 2 screws versus 4. It's 110 pounds pull out. And that means if someone was standing on the roof on this connector, it would take 110 pounds of force pulling up on it to pull it off of the roof. Now change that to 4 and let's see what that value gets to be. Yeah, so it's that's 4. Change it to 8. It was 220. And now when you get up to 8 screws, it goes up to 440, which, in actuality, you're getting pretty close to where a lag bolt would be, which is 573, right? And at this point, there looks like you could go the same distance on it, right? So the important thing to remember is that you do need engineers to look at these if you want to change something, right? And like Dan talked about, if you have a certain type of a roof system like a TJI looks like an I-beam, right? It has a thicker 2x3 on the top of a really thin, narrow piece of OSB that's usually a 1/4 inch, and top and bottom has a 2x3. And those are hard to get a lag bolt into. So you almost can't do that type of install. So you have to plan ahead if you know what the roof system is to be able to use deck mounts and design it for the certain spacing that you need to have. So let's see. I'd like to ask a couple other of you guys. And David, I recognize your name. Would you mind? I'm going to unmute you. And if you wouldn't mind, maybe fill us in a little bit of your experience with deck mounts and rafter mounts. Are you there, David? You might have to unmute yourself. Wait, it looks like you're still muted.
Can
Hang
you
on.
hear me?
Yes. Hi, David.
Okay.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. So we when we design or when we put together our designs, if it is for rafters or deck mounts, we only send the crews with the materials that they will use. So that way we don't have a mix, or they don't use the wrong type of materials. We put that up front. And when we use we mostly use deck mounts, and we know that we have to use more of those. But one of the advantages that we find out with using deck mounts is even though with the screw going into the rafter that you have to put a guiding hole, if we have for any reason a rafter that is not properly spaced, and we put a screw in there, we can damage the rafter. So that's why we are preferring to use decking, so we don't damage the structural integrity of the roof, which is the rafter.
Yeah.
And what we try to do is we identify still where the rafters are, so we can place the decking L-foots close to the rafters, so we can have also the rafters working on supporting the weight. not only having the you know the alpha just scattered around. And the other thing that we always do is that we staggered all of our LFOTs, and we maximize the sizing of them. So we have pretty much every 24, 36 inches, we have an LFOT on our railings.
Yeah, so do you tighten up the spacing a little bit if they wind up having to switch over to deck mounts, or how do you handle that if you realize that you can't, that you might damage the rafters or the spacing's different than you initially anticipated? How do you handle that?
Well, that's what we do is we normally use decking. It's only if we have, instead of plywood or a sheet on the decking, if they have because we have had a couple of jobs where they have actually lumber on the decking, we switch to the Rafter mounts, LFOTs. But
Yeah.
we normally use decking, and we identify, we have our people checking every single place where the rafters are, so we don't get any damage in them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, so the consistent discussion between Dan and David, and I want to touch base on this a little bit, is they're getting information related to the existing conditions, right? So super important to know if you've got TJIs, super important to know if you have rafters, super important to know if you have eye joists, or if you have a manufactured lumber like a glue lam, right? Very important. And the spacing's very important, right? Not only from a connection standpoint, but also to make sure that the roof will support your loading, right? And let's be honest, I mean, you're not talking a lot of weight. There's 3 pounds a square foot that we typically assume for a roof system or for a solar system that's getting installed on the roof. And most roofs are going to be able to support that without too much difficulty. But it is important that we have some information on the roof, because heaven, God forbid, if someone stood on a roof and it was not stable or wasn't able to support a load and they went through the roof, then you're talking a whole nother situation. So it's super important. And I know some of you on this call and other clients that we have may at times not be able to get attic photos, or maybe you have the sales rep who's there is getting attic information, which is better than not having any information at all. At least we can see what the condition of the roof is. But it's super important to be able to have existing photos and existing roof information. And frankly, once you get panels on the roof, they're not really going to add, they don't significantly increase the weight of the roof after they're installed. They become a dead load. But while you're installing it, that's the most stressful part on a roof, because everybody gets up there, they're putting a stack of panels in one spot on the roof. They're putting boxes of equipment. You've got 3 or 4 guys that are, well, I might be like 150, but a lot of people are like 220, right? So if you're getting up on the roof with 4 guys that are 220 and are all standing around in one spot holding panels on and connections, it's stress on that roof. And that's the worst time during the install, because you wind up having cracking appear, and you might have cracks in rafters. And so that's the most difficult part of the roof install, is when it's actually the solar installs, when the guys are installing it and putting it on the roof, right? And I hope that makes sense. And I've actually never been involved with the install while they were doing it. I've seen them after they're done. But I do know, and I've seen it from the ground, that there is a lot of weight that gets put up on the roof during the install. And so you'll notice even in our letters we say, if there's any deflection or any kind of sagging or roof issues, and when someone's standing on the roof when they're going to install it, well, they should notify us immediately, right, and let us know as the engineer, and then we can always address what we need to do in order to make sure people are safe. So anyway, let's ask a couple other people here. Tyler, I actually don't recognize your name, and forgive me if I but why don't you fill us in? What is your role in the solar industry? Are you an installer or an EPC, or um, what's your role, Tyler?
Hey everybody. I work in the design department at Intermountain Wind and Solar, based out of Utah.
Okay.
So I was asked to join this call just to kind of as information gathering. We do typically just rafter mounts. I mean, we install a lot of stuff. We do some standing seam, some corrugated, but for the most part, comp, rafter, penetrations, rafter mounts. So just we're thinking about trying to use some more deck mounts, and I guess that's basically why I'm here, just to learn about pros and cons. We're thinking also about trying to go railless a little bit. I don't know if that's gonna be covered in this or not, but yeah. So that's kind of why I'm here, just to kind of observe.
Okay, that's great. Yep. And Intermountain Solar, Wind and Solar is actually, you guys are our customer, which is great. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And yeah, you can use deck mounts for sure. And just if you make sure you're just aware of the pros and cons, right? So you may need to do less spacing, need to anticipate it at the beginning of the design. And I think a good idea that David identified is he doesn't even let his crews bring out the product that they're not installing, so that there's no question of which product they're installing, so they don't make a decision out in the field not knowing the ramifications of switching over to a different connector. That's good, right? As far as railless systems, there is a lot of value to railless systems, right? And a railless system is basically something that you don't need to install a rail, right? Most of the products, Iron Ridge, Unirac, they have a rail system. It's fairly straightforward when you're installing it. It's not as meticulous. You don't need to be as 100% accurate because the rail can slide left and right. So you have a little bit of latitude when you're using a rail system. With a railless system, it's a little bit harder to install it, but you don't have to spend the cost of a rail. And it supports it basically in between the panels. And so you have to be it's a little bit harder to make adjustments when you're installing it, because you have to be into a rafter or a deck, right? And then you need to make sure that you have it so that the panels meet at a joint, right, in between the two panels, and you can have the connection on the roof there. Now, they're great, but let's talk about a little bit of the pros and cons or the cons about using a railless system. I have a customer of mine who put a railless system here in Utah, and it was in just south of Salt Lake, or Park City, and the snow load was typically around 70 or 80 pounds a square foot, right? Mm-hmm. So the panels aren't typically designed for that type of loading. There are a couple that have frames on them that you can put a little bit more loading on them, but some of the standard and the less expensive panels, which by design, because they don't have a heavy frame around it, don't necessarily take that type of load. And so he had that installed on his roof. It was only connected at like the corner points. And so there was literally like 6 feet between connectors without a rail. So the snow sitting on top of the panel broke the panels, actually pulled the deck mounts that he had on the roof out of the roof. And this happened in 2022 to 2023, which we had like a record, I don't know, 8 or 9 feet of snow that we had. I mean, it was the most snow they've had here in probably 50 years out here in Utah. And so we had a perfect storm, and someone installed that with a deck mount, and they were railless systems. And needless to say, he had some big issues. And the solar company that did that install had to basically replace all of the panels, and the connectors and even repair the roof to make this whole. And what we did after that is we did a 3-rail system. Not only it wasn't just a 2-rail system, it was a 3-rail system to guarantee that he's not going to have the same type of an issue. And so you can understand a 3-rail system is you've got a 6-foot spacing, really, usually they're 66 inches or something like that, where from edge to edge on the panel in a portrait situation. And then you have 3 rails so that it really breaks down the unsupported span and supports those panels, a third of that 66 if you have 3 rails. And if you have 2 rails, then it breaks that 66 down into 33 inches, right? And you can understand that is the best way to install in snow areas, right? So now railless systems are really helpful when you're in an area like California or New Mexico or Arizona or Texas where there's little to no snow, where you don't really need to worry about that additional loading that's on those panels. Yeah, I don't know if Tyler, if that helps a little bit in your thought process when it comes to the railless systems, but there are pros and cons to every system that you install. But you just have to be aware of what they are and know where's the best application. If you guys are doing work in non-snow areas, then a railless system would be great, save you some money on the rails, and you should have no problems with those. Just be careful in areas with no snow that have high wind speeds, though, because that also would be difficult. Because when you look at the spacing of the connectors, your connectors then, if they're railless, would wind up being the full either width or length of the panel, and it may or may not work depending on the wind speed too. So you just have to be careful from that standpoint. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no,
Thanks.
That's super helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great. And so takeaways is, the pros and cons to a rail system. I'm sorry, a rafter mount connection and a deck mount connection. Right, pros and cons. We went over that. We talked a lot about how they get installed. When is the situation when you can substitute, and when are the situations where you should not substitute. High wind areas are areas you should try and stick with rafter mounts. That is the most conservative way to look at it. And you really wouldn't have any issues if you were doing rafter mounts, right? So just be careful there. You get into areas, and I would say anything over 115 miles per hour is something that you want to be concerned about, especially in California, with high wind speeds there. And in Texas along the coast, they also have high wind speeds. And so you want to be careful there along the coast, to try and stick with rafter connections. But areas where there's little to no snow or little to no wind, deck mounts are good. And then if you want to use a railless system, areas with lower wind and no snow are probably great situations where you can use a railless system. And then the other thing too we talked about is site survey. If I were to give any advice, and I know that this is difficult because there's costs associated with having site survey crews. It's cheaper to have sales reps pick up information, and it's also cheaper not to have anybody pick up any information, right? But it's an insurance policy to do a site survey, and I would recommend that everybody who can hear my voice would make sure that they're getting some type of information in attics, so that we know what the systems look like. I I have on my desk several situations where companies have gone out of business, from 2022 when everybody was super busy and we were just couldn't get solar on the roof fast enough in 2022. But you just want to be cautious. If there are issues that pop up, they become liability issues later on in the future, and you're better off with having detailed site survey information to be able to justify what we did and the installs that we did. Greg, did you have a question?
Yes, indeed. So one of the things to be to keep in mind in dovetailing what Scott says, to not know is to guess. And to guess is to put people and property at risk. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's well said, Greg. Yeah. So anyway, I would just encourage all of you to make sure you're getting information on these roof systems. And frankly, I know even with some of the customers that are here, we try we know that we need to move projects along, and we're really fast at getting our return time. But there are times when we're concerned about roofs, and we want to let you guys know so that up front. And I hope and are in some situations where people are not happy that we say, hey, so and so engineering doesn't require us to get this extra information, or so and so engineering doesn't require to do an upgrade in these situations. But there are reasons why we have so many customers, and the reason why we do so many accounts, and the reason why we're so well expected so well respected in the industry is because we look out for our customers' best interests. We're not trying to cut corners, and we're trying to make sure that everybody's safe in those situations. And that's primarily the most important part of what we do, and what all other engineers should be doing in the industry. So I don't want to take a
Really
lot of your
quick,
time.
Can I just add one thing, Scott, that popped
Yeah,
up?
sure, Ben.
And
Sure.
so we get added on. Most of these lawsuits never go anywhere on our side, but we see these lawsuits come in where a customer will sue, companies for a leaking roof or the system's not installed correctly. So it really does pay to take your time and to do things correctly the first time. And we've seen a lot of big companies go out of business. Not saying that they were doing things the wrong way, but I've been in the business now for about 6 years, and doing design, I know which companies have gone out of business, kind of for what reasons, and a lot of it is cutting corners. So trust me, it really is worth doing it right the first time. You're saving money on truck rolls, you're saving your money on a lot of things, and you're going to get referrals from your customers because they'll be happy, and it really does go a long way.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, and I second that for sure. Well, I know I want to be really aware of everybody's time, and I appreciate you guys joining our webinar, and I hope you're enjoying these webinars. And if by all means, if there's something that you guys don't necessarily agree with, please let me know, either on this meeting or outside of this meeting. I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the field. I tell everybody I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm not the dullest tool in the shed either. So there are times when you guys can teach me about installs and the like. And but I've tried to really have our company be one that listens to all of our customers and make sure we're addressing concerns and trying to help where we can. So I'm going to leave the balance of the time over for questions. And I know that some of you guys have already actually talked to, but let's open this up for discussions. And Ben, if you want to take the lead on anybody who wants to ask any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And any suggestions you might have.
Absolutely. If someone has a question, go ahead and, we could unmute everyone now if we don't have anyone.
I would just have people raise their hands so that we're not talking over each other. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and then we'll unmute you, and then we can chat.
One of the things I tell everybody that I get a chance to be in a meeting with is that there's no such thing as a stupid question, except the one you should have asked when you're done. So go for it. There's no judgment here.
Looks like Tyler has a question.
I'm going to mute you.
You hear me?
Yep, we can hear you okay. Go ahead.
Cool. So just to follow up on my question about Railless. So one of our concerns about switching over that product was snow load already. We install up in the Wasatch, and we've switched over to like a 3-rail system, like you were explaining, for a lot of anywhere basically with 100 PSF or over up there. So
I would do it for anything with 50 or over, to be honest with you, rather than 100 and over. Maybe 2 rails for 50 and 3 rails for 100.
Okay, so yeah, I think we do we have an engineering packet we got put together. I don't know if it was you guys, but Yeah, something like over 60, it's like 24-inch on center, and then we switch over to a mid rail over either 90 or 100. So anyway, just to echo that, I like, yeah, highly recommend. We had to make that switch because we had some panels start to bow and crack way back when. So anyway, we would be trying to do the railless down in the valley where it's 43 psf typically, and 115 or 120 mile per hour wind load. Would you think that a deck mount railless is worth exploring with those loads, just kind of like off the top of your head, or is that, it seems like it's kind of flirting with the lines that you've been discussing?
I think you're kind of flirting with the lines that we've been discussing, and we're more than happy to help you. It also depends on the rail, the type of panel that you're using, right?
Sure.
There's an LG panel that has integrated frame around it that you could probably go that route, but it wouldn't be hard to do an analysis for you. And if you're our customer, we're more than happy to just do that with no cost, to be honest with you. If you wanted us to take a look at something that you're considering doing, we'll be more than happy to review that up front.
Okay, awesome. We got to figure out a product first, but yeah, we'll be in touch then. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a good question. Looks like John, is it Doherty? Is that how it's pronounced? Let me know if I said that right. Or John D?
Hold on.
That's a wrong person.
John D here is
We
pronounced
good?
DeBoge if it's showing the full name. Thank you for
Okay.
having me. First of all, we met a couple years ago at RE Plus in Anaheim. I'm the Director of Engineering Services at our process. I manage a 45-person team based out of India. We have clients all over the country and the globe as a whole, and we notice supply chain issues
Yes.
specifically. Do you want to just give us an example of how you've worked through supply chain issues with mounting equipment?
Yeah, no, that's
thank you all for making this happen. Very
yeah,
informative.
no, thank you for
and we,
joining us, John. I
greatly
appreciate
appreciate it.
that. What was the name of your company again, John? I'm sorry.
Our process, R
Our
as in
process.
rural, our process,
Okay.
designs.com.
Okay. Yeah, so supply chain is a huge issue, and it has developed into a huge issue since COVID, right? Where there were a lot of issues with people working and being able to get products, especially from China. And so I think that's when we started substituting products in the field or before we even went to the field, because we didn't have certain products, right? And while it's okay to substitute products, but it's not okay if you need to get engineers input if you're looking to substitute deck mounts in a situation where you're using rafters, right? And I can't tell you how many times that I've gone a request to do a post install certification on an account that our initial certification had them in rafters, and then it's coming back as being deck mounted, and then we have an issue because then we have to send crews back out. They may have to install more. If it works, it's great because sometimes it'll work and there's no issue depending on the wind speed and snow loads, right? It'll work. But in the situations where it doesn't, people are just not happy because you definitely have to go back out and put in more connectors. But yeah, supply plane issues has been an incredible difficult part of the last couple years, that have impacted the solar industry tremendously. So, yeah, no, that's a good point. But the other thing is there are local companies that house things. What's the problem is that there are companies that are buying products directly from the manufacturer and they have to store it, right? So they may not have a warehouse where they can store a lot of product. So then that winds up where they have to be strategic and make sure they're ordering products ahead of time to make sure they get it. But there are other distribution companies that have larger warehouses that can have that product on hand more so than if you bought it directly from the manufacturer. And I could think of some people like Iron Ridge is a company that does not deal directly with customers because of the supply chain issue, and their distributors have the product, have the warehouse, they have it on hand, and they usually can get that product much faster. A Unirack is usually they'll go directly with a customer and sell, but then that customer is limited on the space on how much product he can buy, and then he's stuck with it. If something changes where he can't use that product, he still has a ton of that product. So yeah, that's one of the other things that I would recommend is it costs a little bit more to deal with distributors, but they protect you in with supply chain issues like we're talking about. But I don't know if that answers your question, John.
My question was working through some of those challenges, examples of experience personally that you have gone through. Just for
So I
fun.
don't purchase products. So we don't do installs. We're only we're a design engineering structural and electrical firm. And we have not actually, I don't purchase supplies. My experience is really just with, talking with firms who do installs that are our customers, and hearing the stories about supply chain issues or us having to redo hundreds of accounts to revise the product because they had supply chain issues. So I don't know that I can answer how I've dealt with it personally, because we really don't purchase products. And I apologize if that doesn't help.
Sorry, I'll frame it in a different way. When your customer comes to you and says, we're limited to this type of equipment, and this is outside of your all's typical scope, or it's a new type of equipment specifically, or an equipment that you need to research on your own, how long does it take you all to give a reply, or how does that change your all's approach with that particular client when they say they are limited to either deck mount or rafter mount only?
Yeah, no, that's very clear. Thank you for explaining that, John. We can work with just about any of our customers who come to us and have a product that they want to use. If it's like a deck mount versus a rafter mount, we would just give them the spacing that they would need to have and let them know up front, in these certain areas you probably need to be at this spacing, and they'll know when they do their designs to address that, and then they submit it to us. So they take into account up front that they're going to be using a deck mount. Maybe they can't get a rafter mount and they want to use a deck mount, and then we can easily give them direction and advice on how to do that with their designs. And for situations where we don't necessarily, it's a new product or it's a product we're not as familiar with, we typically will review that and super quick. Like we may make calls to the manufacturer and talk through products. There's like one product I can think of as a solar strap, which is kind of like it's not glue, but it adheres. It actually welds to a TPO surface and a membrane, and we really had to research that with the manufacturer in order to make sure we looked at testing data, we understood the process, and then we made an engineering decision for our customer in that sense. And that may take a week, right? There's other products out there that maybe we've done the same thing with. There's ballast systems where they have that they don't mount into the ground, they sit on the ground, and you could put gravel or sand inside these plastic containers, and that counterbalances the loads. And we've researched those for our customers. And there's even newer ground mounts out there that we'll research. So yeah, there really isn't any product that we can't help our customers. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have a full in-house electrical department and structural department, and there really isn't anything that we're not able to address or deal with from an engineering standpoint. We even have expertise in, site planning. I've done some site plans in the Virgin Islands for customers of ours when they need to do soil erosion control. There isn't a limit to what we can work on. We can even help with designs of metal buildings as well too. So anyway, I hope, does that answer your question, John?
Yes, sir. Great context. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm just throwing my email in for you guys to, you have more specific questions or something you can want to talk about after, you can email me and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, and I'll put my email in here as well. So another question I wouldn't mind to ask, we have maybe 5 minutes and then we'll stop. I'm curious as to how everybody is making out in the industry that we have now. Financing has been a lot more difficult. Um, um, Selling solar has been a lot more difficult because of the interest rates. It is definitely a different industry than what we've seen in the past. And I don't know if you guys want to share a little bit of how that's impacted your business, but if we have a couple minutes left, and maybe this is a whole nother seminar or webinar that we need to have related to that. But I don't know if any of you guys want to share how you've been dealing with some of those struggles. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
The
John, yeah.
market, like you were referencing, the great year of 2022 for solar PV, our golden year. The market has cooled for us noticeably as well. And like I referenced, we do business on four other continents, including North America. And I'm not to the point yet of saying that it's a global, it's felt globally in the industry quite yet, because some of our regions are doing very good, some not so well. But it does feel as though some of the tariffs in USA are starting to affect it on top of the interest rate as well.
Yeah, and so are you, it sounds like you're not installers, but you work with installers and solar companies, right? So how are they dealing with it? I mean, we've seen a lot of companies fold under the last several years. Some of them really big players like ADT and Titan. These are leaders in the industry. So how are your customers dealing with it, John?
The ones that kept a low overhead when the times were good are surviving, and the ones that were keeping with the trends and expanding and taking on new debt and being extremely aggressive are the ones that are suffering the most.
That's spot on. I think I agree with you 100%. And I was just having a conversation with someone today about if they have with finance companies, if you have your own money, then you're being pretty golden at this point. You don't have to deal with, financiers and loan and borrowing money. And maybe it's not as practical for some larger companies, but like you said, they maybe didn't keep low overhead. They extended themselves on loans, and they weren't closing out projects when they should have, and financing got pulled. But I think you're right on there, John. I appreciate your comments on that. Thank you.
And thank you. Just same with us. We got to keep a low overhead, but we got to cover our asses.
Exactly.
And ensure have a high factor of safety to make sure that our quality of design is at the highest level, and that's why those site evals are so valuable even in the tougher times.
Agreed. 100%. Anybody else? All right. Well, Ben, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap things up, and we can put this one in the books. And we're doing these seminars or these webinars once a month, so more than happy to look at some suggestions related to topics. Right? I don't know if this was a super beneficial topic, but if you guys have suggestions on things you want us to cover, between the in-house resources that we have, there really isn't any topic we couldn't address or discuss. So yeah, you can let us know what topics you would like. And thank you guys again for participating and being supportive of the solar industry and of Whistling Consulting. For those of you who are customers of mine, we appreciate your willingness to work with us, and we've always been big on partnerships and developing relationships. And for those of you who are not customers of ours, we'd love to set up a chat with you or a call show you what we can do and how we can help you.
Thank
I'll
you,
give it back
Scott.
to you, Ben.
We appreciate it. We appreciate everyone attending. Just so you know, I put my phone number in there too. If you have any questions, you can call me. And then we do put these webinars on our website. They're usually on within 10 days. So you can go back and revisit if you have any other questions. And again, we just appreciate you. And we'll see you guys again next month.
Thank you, guys.
Have a beautiful day.
Take care.